Hello and welcome to the Voices of the Learning Network, the podcast where we explore ideas, people and projects shaping the future of learning. I'm your host today, Bill Banham, Board Director at the Learning Network. And today, in our first episode of the new season, we're joined by Richard Price, Vice Chair of the Learning Network and National Workforce Learning and Tech Specialist at NHS England. Richard is a global health workforce education and technology specialist working with the NHS and World Health Organization to develop learning technologies and build digital capabilities to prepare the global workforce for a digital future. Richard, welcome to the podcast. Thank you very much for being my guest today.
Thanks, Bill. Great to be here and great to be working with you again.
Richard, you are a long-time member of the Learning Network. For those members or listeners who haven't, however, met you yet, please can you start by telling me a bit about your role as Vice Chair and why the Learning Network is important to you?
So I've been on the board now for a couple of years, and I was originally looking after our technology stack as a technical director. Which is fun. It has its challenges in an organisation that has sort of limited finances, limited funds, but we've made it work, and I hope everybody can see some improvements over the last couple of years that I've been on the board. So I'm now the Vice Chair, which, as you well know, Bill, doesn't mean I get to relinquish any of those previous responsibilities. It just adds more. So in the Vice Chair role, of the great privilege of supporting our fantastic industry partners and helping them to develop what I think of and having real conversations with our members. And I think that's really important because I think we do give opportunities for sort of thought leadership and webinars and things like that, but it's the real relationships that I think are key. Again, great privilege to be able to do that as Vice Chair. It also means I support Rebecca with some of her responsibilities as Chair. And taking on some of the management of the finances, making sure the network's running smoothly, along with yourself and all of our fellow directors. And as I said, you don't get to relinquish stuff, so still looking after tech with the support of Tom and other members of the board. So I guess, why is it important to me? I first became a member of the Learning Network, probably nearly 10 years ago now. And like a lot of the membership, I was working alone on my own in L&D. And that's quite common in our industry, I guess. And sometimes it can feel really isolating. And sometimes it can feel you don't know what you're doing necessarily, and you need that peer network. And Learning Network at the time offered me that opportunity. I'm going to do a bit of a sales pitch here, and I promise this will be the last one on this podcast. But at the time, it was a fantastic value for money. It was £29 a year, and it's still the same price. So joking aside, despite everything going up and it being the same price, I genuinely think it's one of the best value communities out there by a long way. And if you're not a member already, I really would encourage you to join. But like I say, promise no more sales pitches. So when I joined the board as director, I wanted to give back to that network that's helped me over my career over the years. And as you know, it's a 2 to 4 year tenure on the board, and that's not a lot of time to make an impact. But I like to think we're sort of passing through history, as it were. We're custodians of the network, and that's what really matters to me, making sure that the network continues to thrive, to flourish beyond me into the future, so that it's in good footing for future boards, for future members, for future industry partners.
The Connect conference is coming up in November, Richard. Why should listeners of this pod grab a ticket, and what can they expect if they attend?
This is one of my favourite conferences of the year. I love World of Learning. I love learning technologies, but they're big conferences in big venues. And sometimes I think it's really hard to have real conversations and make real connections at those events. And Connect, because it is much smaller, it gives you that time to have real chats with people and those meaningful conversations. And I think that's really what differentiates it from all of the other big conferences out there. So I'm really, really excited about Connect this year, because it allows me to have those conversations with amazing people that work in our L&D industry.
We've got some pretty cool keynotes and lots of amazing sessions. You mentioned that you've been a member of the Learning Network now for about 10 years, so you've been to a whole bunch of these Connects over the years, I'm sure. This will be the second one for me. What Connect sessions or speakers are you excited to see at the 2025 edition?
So it's always good to see the keynote speakers and hear from them. I know Julian very well from previous work within my day job in the NHS. But Amy Brand is new to me, but I've seen her book and really excited to hear her keynote speech. And of course, I think, again, it's those kind of sessions in between, which I think are really valuable. There is a networking session that's purely about networking. Not a lot of conferences do that. And actually, that's really good because it gives you the opportunity to have those real conversations and make those real connections, like I say. So yeah, loads of things I'm excited about Connect. Speaking to exhibitors, having those conversations, and I should just say the venue is amazing and the catering's really, really good. Some of the best catering out there of any conference.
Okay, well then, what's not to love? There will be links in the show notes and associated content, listeners, to the Connect conference, so you can check it out there too and get your tickets. And by the way, I interviewed Amy last week as we record this particular interview. Amy's awesome, fantastic energy, super clever. I think attendees are gonna love her session. And by the way, Amy, I took your advice, and last weekend I went to Stratford upon Avon. It was beautiful. Thank you, Amy. Anyway, continuing on, let's talk a bit about you and your day job and what you get up to now. What are some of the big challenges, Richard, facing the health workforce in the UK and globally? And as part of your answer, perhaps you can share why is global health important?
So yeah, back to my day job, I suppose. So I've worked in workplace learning development for around 20 years, working in the health and care sector. So some of that's within the NHS, some of that more broadly, but it's something I'm really proud of to support, because healthcare, education are just two of the most fundamental things that all of us can do in society. And I'm really proud to support that education and training of everyone in the health workforce. So whether they're, I guess, going through their undergraduate degrees, whether into their postgraduate training or into the workforce. So I've had the privilege of getting to know and work with doctors, nurses, allied health professionals, pharmacists, healthcare scientists, the whole sort of spectrum of amazing health workers that we get to work with in this country. So yeah, like I say, primarily that was kind of regionally, domestically. But in recent years, I've taken on some new work, some new roles working in global health, and looking at, I guess, how we can connect and share, and much like Learning Network, but looking how we can connect and learn from other health systems to improve our own health system, but also share some of that knowledge we've got from the UK health system to support other health systems. So the UK, as you may or may not know, has the largest and oldest universal health coverage system in the world. And a lot of countries, a lot of nations look to the NHS as kind of an exemplar of what good healthcare looks like. And so we want to give back, we want to share. So working in global health means I get to do that. So I suppose why is it important, this work? It is about sort of sharing that knowledge between different systems and building capacity in other healthcare systems. So there's real lack of equity in healthcare. So it is really dependent on where you're fortunate enough or unfortunate enough to be born, how good your healthcare is. And I think we've got a responsibility as a high income country to be able to share some of that knowledge and build that capacity across borders and support that workforce and tackling some of those shared health challenges. If COVID-19 taught us nothing else, is that healthcare doesn't stop at the border. It does transcend national boundaries, and there's this interconnectedness of health and care systems that you can't avoid, and we need to work with our other country health systems to be able to build that. I mean, there are some huge challenges around sort of inequality of access to training and education. And I think democratization of access to that education is going to be key, but there are also some big challenges about how you do that around connectivity in rural areas in particular. I was working on a nurse upskilling program in Telangana state in India a few years ago, and at the time, and hopefully it's improved now, I've not kept up to this, but at the time it was 30% internet penetration in the state. So there's some big rural areas that are just completely unserved by internet. So all of the things we take for granted in this country, like e-learning and other sort of healthcare online learning and education, just wouldn't happen in those rural areas. So how do you sort of address those big challenges? We've got massive shortages of workforce around the world. There was a WHO report last year about aging health and care workforce in Western Europe in particular. So it's particularly acute in our bit of the world. And also the brain drain, I think it's called. So essentially that's health workers leaving rural locations to earn more in the cities. We've seen that in Georgia, in Eastern Europe and some of these countries. Or in some cases, like in Ghana, for example, despite it being on the sort of red list about you're not allowed to recruit people from Ghana, lots of countries do, because people leave the country voluntarily and want to work abroad to earn more income. We see this all the time with Filipino nurses, for example, as well. There's limited funding. We know the WHO budget being slashed. Global aid, like USAID, has been pulled. And there's just sort of really challenges with infrastructure as well. And then, of course, you've got the big global challenges like climate change. We know last year there was flooding in Pakistan. We know 30% of the country was underwater. I mean, how can a health system possibly kind of manage or survive under those circumstances? We've got the threats of disease X coming. We all survived COVID, but what happens next? Who's monitoring that? Who's gonna manage that? And then, like I say, the funding situation. So I know I'm painting a very bleak picture, Bill, but that's unfortunately the reality of some of the context of the work I've been doing in global health.
Okay, and I'm just going to pull you up on one thing. 1938, New Zealand introduced its own National Health Service. So it's just before the UK. So I think the UK is number 2. Okay, thank you then. So I guess a couple of follow-up questions. So let's combine those. How can education address some of the challenges you've just mentioned? And as part of your answer, how are educators and organisations trying to overcome those challenges?
So, yeah, like I said, I've mentioned education partnerships, and I think that's really key. There's some great organisations like VET, which are called Global Health Partnership. Now they're doing some fantastic work about building those education relationships between ministries of health and health systems like that. I guess investment is going to be one of the key challenges of how we deal with some of these sort of big problems, and can't really get away from the fact that this stuff costs money. But actually, there's some really good stuff you can do that doesn't necessarily cost huge amounts of money. But ultimately, it's about, I guess, building local capacity, making sure that we upskill people in digital capabilities. We did some work in the Philippines, for example, around building their digital capacity, because they know that they need to adapt, they need to pivot to be able to take advantage of new technologies in healthcare, and they need their workforce to be able to upskill to do that. So there are initiatives like WHO Academy that are doing some fantastic work. They're based out of Lyon in France, and they are building a global online learning platform for health workers. And again, just sort of targeting e-learning are really sort of key initiatives that are going to address some of those wicked problems, those big challenges. There's organisations like Learn Appeal, which is the learning industry charity. It's still, they did some great work a few years ago around internet connectivity, and providing a learning management system in low resource settings where there was no internet connection, for example. So things like that are really key. I think mobile first learning, everybody, wherever you go in the world, has a mobile phone in their pocket. They may not have running water, but they have a mobile phone in their pocket, even if it's a family phone. And I think we need to leverage that. Connectivity is a challenge. Some of them aren't the latest devices. We did some work in Uganda with Google Cardboard, and what we found is actually some of the phones don't have accelerometers, for example. So VR becomes a bit of a problem when you're trying to use devices like that. But it doesn't mean that there aren't solutions to these problems. So I think, like I say, there are lots of organisations out there trying to overcome these challenges and doing some fantastic work.
Okay, wonderful. I've got so many more questions for you. However, we are almost out of time. So that just means, Richard, I'm going to have to harass you until you agree to come back on the pod. Yeah. But for today, before we wrap up, how can listeners connect with you? So is that LinkedIn? Do you want to share your Learning Network email address? All those things. I bet you're super cool and on TikTok. And of course, how can they learn more about the Connect conference?
Oh, I wish I was super cool, Bill, but I'm really not. But thanks for thinking of me like that. So I'm on LinkedIn and all the usual social channels as Richard Price UK. And of course, Connect tickets available now on the Learning Network website. So get your tickets now if you can.
Richard, I've had a lot of fun with you today. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks so much, Bill. Really great chatting to you.